The Big Light presents.
I kid you not, like after I think a week, I was like, wow, this is what it feels like to have a good night's sleep and actually feel a bit more balanced.
My name is Helena Rafai, and this is the A Sonic Hug podcast. Over the coming episodes, you're going to hear the voices of people from different walks of life who deal, experience, and battle mental health issues. In this episode of Series 4, I speak with Jordan, a creative performance maker and artist. In our conversation, Jordan shares their deeply personal journey with chronic insomnia, a condition that has shaped their life since early childhood. Their story weaves together the complex layers of living with cystic fibrosis, exploring gender identity, and navigating neurodivergence, all while seeking that elusive good night's sleep. Jordan speaks honestly about how insomnia has affected their mental health, relationships, and creative pursuits, and how finding the courage to seek help ultimately led to profound personal transformation. This is Jordan's story.
I think it started around age 4 or 5. I have a very specific snapshot memory of I was struggling to sleep one night when I was a kid, and my parents had been having a party with friends. I think it was a weekend, and I kept tossing and turning, and I remember this feeling in my body of like almost like jelly and shaking and restlessness, and I didn't understand why. So I went through to the living room and I interrupted the party, and I remember, I think it was either my aunt or my mum, this sort of visual of a woman with dark hair had taken me through and couldn't get me to settle. So the best option was to put the television on and put on like a Disney VHS tape. And that kind of started these episodes of insomnia where I couldn't sleep and I was so restless. So after that point, I'd remember it so vividly. That became the moment where it was like I had to sleep with a television on. And over the years, I've often thought to myself, like, what's been the cause of this? And there could be multiple factors. But at the time, it was very clear that there was a disruptiveness in the house, in the family house, with my parents and who they were and their friends and what they did. And, you know, later in therapy, I realised how damaged they were and how that had a knock-on effect on me. But at that point, it was a situational thing. And then as time progressed, I started to have this weird thing where it was like I would try to sleep in my sort of early teens, and I would start thinking about, say we had watched the news in the house, so like Channel 4 News or BBC, and you'd see all these awful negative stories about people being murdered, or I remember Holly and Jessica, these two young girls had been kidnapped in the early 2000s, and we were in Butlins, and we'd saw it on telly, and I had this like impending doom feeling of, oh my God, what has happened to those girls? And would that happen to me? And then it kind of started triggering this feeling of like uncertainty and unsafety in the world, that bad things happen. And therefore I couldn't stop thinking about these things and ruminating. So again, television and listening to something that was distracting seemed to help me sleep. And that followed me consistently throughout my life. I think when I was younger, it was difficult. You know, school was really difficult for me. The impact of sleep and what it's done for relationships in my life has been quite challenging. When I was younger and I was at school, it became quite difficult with friendships. I would find my energy levels were really low. I found it had a knock-on effect on my studying. There were certain subjects like the performing arts, drama, music, that I didn't have a lot of energy, but I could use up the energy I was surviving on to perform in class and really get the emotion and the angst from how I was feeling across. Whereas uni as well, it became the same situation when I was at uni, where I was doing drama and I was, you know, putting my energy and emotions into what I was doing, which probably were a bit chaotic. I found when I was actually in halls in 2015, I was really struggling with seasonal affective. And that's when my insomnia gets really bad as well. I become a bit of a hermit, but I can't sleep and I ruminate. Therefore, I would just watch TV constantly and not sleep for days. My partner and I at the time, it was getting quite challenging because he was a really good sleeper. So I was quite envious. And then it would be like this weird thing where I'd, for like almost like 2 weeks, just sleep constantly. And I thought I was depressed, and so did he at the time. So this is 2015 to 16. And then when I started DJing, you know, obviously as a DJ, being able to stay up till 3 or 4 in the morning is a gift, because you're playing to a pub or a nightclub that late at night. So my work relationships blossomed because my career blossomed because I was a night owl. I could stay up late and party until the early hours of the morning, which, you know, I was in my early 20s. I think a lot of people I know were doing the same. I just don't think they had mental health related problems that were maybe always going towards it, the people that I was around, although maybe they did, I don't know. I met a lot of really good people through the DJing and being able to, you know, go to after parties and stay up all night and strike to a lot of friendships. But I also had a lot of toxic people around me. So I think that maybe didn't help. As things kind of progressed, as I got older, I started getting more ill with my cystic fibrosis. My sleeping got worse. I found that if I had chest infections, it would have a knock-on effect on my sleep. You know, no one wants to sleep with lungs that feel like they're on fire. So that was difficult. I went on an anti-anxiety med that did help with the anxiety-related insomnia. But then I found the withdrawal was awful when I had to come off of it. And that really put me off an antidepressant for quite some time. Because I was like, oh, well, things that anti-anxiety meds are doing this. What would that do? I found that when I had to speak to doctors, my relationship with doctors wasn't great because of the way the medical system is, especially if you're marginalised and non-binary trans like myself. It's really difficult to speak to medical professionals and not feel like there's an oppression going on underlying there. As it kind of progressed, and I started to get older, I started to think to myself, was there a neurodivergent element to this? Because I've clearly got a parent that's neurodivergent, no diagnosis, but it's just very obvious, post-pandemic especially, with how they navigate things. And I found in relationships, like romantic interests, the sleep was only ever really a problem when I started sleeping next to somebody. I had never lived with someone else. I'd had been in and out relationships with quite toxic partners. You know, I played my own role in that I probably wasn't the most emotionally available myself. But they definitely weren't really helping my life at the time. And I never really had to sleep with them. I had a bit of a rule that I didn't stay over at someone's house unless we were like official. And then as I started dating after the pandemic, I'd been with someone who was like me and couldn't sleep. So TV was brilliant for both of us. Whereas I'll never forget the second relationship I had after the pandemic. That individual was like me and couldn't sleep. I felt like it was a spiritual thing that I couldn't sleep, so they couldn't sleep. But I always remember thinking there's a reason they can't sleep. And I felt like they felt uncomfortable in the relationship. I don't know why, I just did. And then it felt like it had a knock-on effect on me. And I was trying everything. You know, I was like, oh, shall we get a cooling mat? Shall we watch TV shows you like? Shall we listen to music that hums to help you sleep? And they kept saying, oh, no, I'll just get used to it. I'll just get used to it. But I could just get this energy and feeling lying next to that person that they were uncomfortable. And then I was like really struggling to sleep. And I'll never forget, we broke up after only being together for 3.5 months, which was just so tragic at the time because it felt like it had been a whirlwind and I hadn't slept for like a week. And we broke up and I never forget thinking, like, did I just imagine this? Is this like a daydream at the time? Because it was just so surreal how we'd been official for a week and a half and then broke up a week and a half later. And I thought to myself, God, am I going to ever be able to like share a bed with somebody? Like if this is the impact insomnia has. It later transpired it wasn't anything to do with insomnia though. I think it was just a knock-on effect. But I think that person and I just weren't meant to be. There was one moment where I had hit rock bottom with this and knew this just wasn't sustainable. And it was in the pandemic and after lockdown one. We were in August 2020. And I had started this new medication for my CF, which is called a gene modulator. And it's been a game changer for 90% of people with CF that have a gene mutation type, and they can take it. And one of the side effects was potential insomnia, but I had had that my whole life. So I knew that that wasn't going to have been caused by that drug. And I went on the drug, and at the time we were in lockdown, I was getting well physically with my lungs, but mentally I was in the worst point. I was cutting ties with my emotionally abusive, in and out of relationship ex. I was not sleeping. They put me on Zopiclone sedatives to try and help instead of an antidepressant. And it was just awful. I was just for weeks like feeling like a zombie. And it actually turned out in the August that I'd been put on Zopiclone for like 3 months, and I shouldn't have been on it for that long. So I was like a zombie, no really sleeping, just sort of in and out of it when I was going to bed. And we were in the pandemic when everyone was struggling. I mean, I was surprised if anyone wasn't struggling during the pandemic emotionally, but I had been shielding, living on my own because I'm high risk and still am. I hadn't seen anyone properly for like 8 to 10 weeks at this point. We got into the August. We were in the phases of people could, come and visit people in gardens. So I'd got my garden done up and friends would come and see me. And I just was really struggling. Like I knew I wasn't in a good place. I was having a bit of an identity crisis, but the sleep insomnia was so bad at the time. And my ex and I were kind of at like loggerheads of like, is this going to happen or is this not? Because we were just all over the place, me and him. And I had friends round for their birthdays, and I had not slept well for so long. And we'd all got drunk in the front garden. And this was after lockdown. The government had been like, right, we're not in lockdown anymore. And I just had this breakdown while drunk that, my life was a shambles. What was I doing? Like, I was struggling emotionally. I wasn't sleeping well. I was hating my life. And, the friends that I'm still friends with now that were there were so supportive and kind to me. And I kind of think it was like this low episode that I went, right, do you know what? I need to phone the GP about this. Like, I can't cope with this now. And I phoned her and I told her I was just not sleeping. She went through it with me and said, how often do you get sleep? I went, maybe 3 or 4 hours if I'm lucky a night. At the moment, I'm getting like 2 or 3. It's inconsistent, but then I'm crashing for weeks and sleeping constantly. Therefore, I'm like exhausted. And she put me on mirtazapine and said to me, like, we can consider this. And she said, maybe you've got OCD, because I had compulsive behavior and obsessive tendencies. But then there was also conversations later in life about, is it ADHD? There's definitely something neurospicy going on here. But at the time, I was like, nah, something's got to give here. And I was really like in my head, like, proud in my ego. Like, I can't believe that I have to take antidepressants. I've tried so hard. I've done therapy. I've done all the exercise and self-help books and nothing's working. And I took it, and I kid you not, like after I think a week, I was like, wow, this is what it feels like to have a good night's sleep and actually feel a bit more balanced. And I don't know, something kicked in me that happened. I then cut ties with that awful guy. What was holding me back from exploring my gender identity and coming out as non-binary and later trans femme was being with that guy because he was transphobic. So I'd cut ties. I came into my fully realized self. I then had a knock-on effect where once I was feeling a bit more put together and sleep, and we were sort of in the phase of moving out the pandemic, but not quite. I was thinking, right, what am I doing with my life? Why am I still friends with people that are really toxic, that just want me to drink and misbehave and be really like unstable? It's not good for me. And who actually is important in my life? And I think that moment was like the sobering effect of like, you need to get this insomnia under control. Your mental health is not great. And I was in therapy online at the time. And I still advocate, I still go to therapy now, but I don't think if I had done a combination of medication and therapy that my mental health would be as good as it is now.
In the space between sleeplessness and rest, there's a world of experience that many of us may never fully understand. As we pause in Jordan's story, let's take a moment to acknowledge our own relationship with sleep and the quiet hours of the night. Find a position that feels comfortable for you. Notice how your body feels in this moment. Perhaps there's tension you've been carrying, or perhaps there's a heaviness of fatigue that resonates with what you've heard. Take a full breath now, drawing air deep into your lungs. As you exhale, imagine releasing any judgment about your own sleep patterns or mental health journey. Perhaps you recognize parts of yourself in Jordan's words. The rumination that keeps the mind active when the body craves rest, or the search for coping mechanisms that offer comfort in difficult times. Or maybe you're simply here, listening and witnessing another's experience. Whatever you bring to this moment is welcome. Join me for 3 steady breaths. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4, and out, 2, 3, 4. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4, and out, 2, 3, 4. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4, and out, 2, 3, 4. Carry with you whatever resonates from Jordan's story so far, and when you're ready, we'll return to hear more about their journey.
The insomnia exacerbates my mental health because it fuels the anxiety that I would have. You know, I know if I've not slept well one day, how I'm going to feel that day. It's kind of like that feeling of like, oh, it's another Monday, or oh, it's a blue Monday, or oh, it's dark outside and grey. It's that's how it feels for me. It's like I'll wake up and go, I didn't sleep well. Oh, this is going to like ruin my day now. Oh, I'm going to have to deal with this person on like a Teams call later. Like I used to be the chair of a counselling service for under a year, and I used to think if I had an insomnia flare up, there was a point actually for about a month where I was just not sleeping and I was feeling awful, and I was having to make really like serious decisions for a counselling service going, how am I doing this? I'm so exhausted. It was having quite a serious effect on me. And when I was younger, for example, you know, especially when I was having issues with my CF, like if I was having insomnia episodes, I was just struggling to remember if I was even taking my medication. I actually at one point was like having to start writing down, I've taken this med this morning, I've taken this one this afternoon, because I was actually thinking to myself, did I take this and am I going to double dose by mistake? Which obviously can be quite serious to double dose like things like antibiotics if I was on an antibiotic course. So it was quite tricky. I think the anxiety creeped up. I think the forgetfulness, the memory, the stress levels were bad. I felt like I was more reactive to just probably quite mundane things. Like I remember once I had an insomnia flare up and the cat had been sick, and I pure convinced myself the cat was going to have to get put down, which was just irrational because I was like, the cat's not going to get put down over vomiting once. So it's things like that. I don't mind sharing, but there was a point where my insomnia was really bad and I was having an episode over it where I was like not sleeping for like 2 weeks, fueled of anxiety. But it was flared up by the fact that I was with someone who was very emotionally abusive. So it was kind of like this circular thing of he wasn't really good to me, therefore I couldn't sleep because I was like stressing and struggling with the relationship. And then that was having a knock-on effect because I wasn't able to navigate it. And obviously in the context of emotional abuse, like, you know, I don't think anyone can handle that in a rational way when you're being put through these things. But the insomnia on top of that, you know, some people might have in that situation turned their phone off and avoided. You know, I've known a lot of people that have slept when they've been really depressed and struggling, but for me it was the opposite effect. It was like, oh, is he going to like turn up at my door if I don't text him back? Yeah, there was impact of like stress, memory and anxiety for sure. When you go to places like therapy or you do the online resources or self-help books, one of the things about getting tools and resources to help your mental health is like things like art space, you know, music and writing. And I at the time was like, this is what I get paid to do. So I don't really want to make art that conveys my emotions. What am I going to do? And what I really found became a safe space for me were two things. One was reading books. I hadn't read books for so long, particularly audiobooks and podcasts are what I loved. but like listening to podcasts or books that were like-minded people talking about ways to cope with mental health, tools and resources, but also their lived experience. I fell in love with things like Oprah's Masterclass, How to Fail, all these podcasts that were talking about, embracing the negative parts of your life and becoming a fully rounded person. And I just thought, I feel like I understand more about myself in that. And the second was going for walks and being in nature. And I did not expect in my life to be the spiritual person I am now, a nature loving person. I just didn't expect that for me. If I was to look back 10 years ago at what I was like, but being in nature really changed things for me. Going for a walk in Queensferry where my friend stays and being out by the horses, going to Portobello Beach and walking along the prom. And I think the grounding element of being outside, I'll never forget, I had a therapist who sadly lost her life to cancer in 2021. I'll never forget, we would do really intensive sessions online and she would say to me, open your windows. And I would say, what do you mean? And she'd say, open your windows, let all that energy out of the room that you've just talked about. And I would be like, at first I'd be like, what's she talking about? So I would do it. And now it's like, for me, just that cold breeze air is like, it wakens your soul for me when you feel that cold breeze on your skin. Like you feel more alive and you're like, right, I'm back to earth right now. So I always open the windows when things are getting a bit tough. It's only now that I'm in a relationship with someone who, because I think there's someone there I can sleep without a television on, but if he was to say, go and stay with his friends or go and stay with his family, I would revert to watching Sex and the City in bed. A typical night for me now is watching TV in the living room with my partner and settling down, decompressing around, say, 8 or 9 o'clock. We're both off our computers. I'm really guilty of going on my phone and scrolling Instagram and Facebook. I'm on a journey with that. I'm really trying to work on my boundaries around that. But anyone who's a creative listener will know the struggle is real when you're constantly having to think about content, engagement. And if you're consistently posting and then what are other accounts posting, it's really hard. I'm in a slippery slope with it. And I'm so guilty, and I own that guilt, of I am on my phone far too much than I should be. But I'm definitely better than where I was before. We'll then round off for the night. We'll probably go and watch something in bed on television. And I think what I find I do that really helps is I'll take my antidepressant I was put on, and I'll now take that like half an hour or an hour before I'll actually intend to sleep. And it seems to do the job. And then I'm kind of out for the night and I get like 7 or 8 hours. And it's magic. I just can't believe it took until age 25 to actually be like, wow, I've not been sleeping properly my whole life and how detrimental that's been to my life. Explaining it to my current partner, it didn't really feel difficult because I just said I'm on an antidepressant for insomnia. They don't know if it's OCD. They don't know if it's that I'm maybe ADHD and don't sleep because of that, or they don't know if it's just the trauma of navigating a difficult life growing up. And he was just so supportive and understood, and he didn't even kind of need to question it. As I've gotten older, and I'm 30 now, I can see that there's a safety element of I feel comfortable lying next to him. I don't think it's actually made our relationship worse. I think it's made us kind of become bonded and grow, really. What I would want the medical profession to understand with insomnia is that if you have insomnia, you should be treating the insomnia itself and then offering them mental health support, but not labeling that person as difficult or, oh, well, you have insomnia, it must be your diet. Or you have insomnia, or it must be your lifestyle. Do you drink alcohol? Do you take drugs? Or you have insomnia, it must be who you surround yourself with. These are all also relevant points I may add, but it feels like, and I think it's a difficult one for me because I've got cystic fibrosis on top of things. So I've also got that element that plays a role. But for me, it's the unfortunate thing with medical professions is it's easy to make assumptions rather than question and try and find a holistic answer. I got quite a lot of judgment from medical professionals on the kind of work that I did. There was almost like a judgment towards, oh, well, you're a DJ, you must party, drink all the time, go out all the time, not take care of yourself, which was never the case. There was points that I was like that, like any functioning, 20-year-old that wanted to live their fun life and go out and party. But there was also a lot of people I know that didn't do that. And there were points where if I had been unwell that I wouldn't go out and drink and party and DJ. I would get my shifts covered. I guess it's that thing with the medical professionals to have an open mind and try and support, which just at the moment doesn't always feel like what's done. I was lucky that my GP didn't actually judge me and was quite kind and empathetic and wanted to help me. And, you know, I had thought for years, if I go to them about this, they're just going to laugh and mock me, because in the past when I brought up, it's been squashed down by other types of doctors. But she was very kind and very open. And I think the fact she was horrified that I'd said, you know, since I was about age 4 or 5, I've really struggled with this and never actually been able to cope. But I just thought this was normal for me. I guess for anyone who's struggling with insomnia, the beginning stages, or this has been a consistent thing for their life, you know, it's never too late to question why and get help. Going online and searching things can get very messy because there's a lot of misspread information out there, but there's also a lot of good information out there, and looking into like, are there things you can change? You know, like, is it that you want to consider medication? Is it you want to go to a therapist? Is there a free counselling service in your area? Is it something you can budget for? You know, I would want people to know that it is something that is tricky and it comes in waves and episodes. You know, it's not something I think that, to be honest, can be cured, because I recently had an insomnia episode several months ago, and I just thought it was down to the seasonal change in weather, because sometimes that happens for me. But again, you know, I had the initiative to trust my voice, trust who I am and my instinct, and go, right, what's going on for me here? The weather change, the cold weather. Do I want to consider taking a vitamin D supplement? Do I need to go to bed a bit earlier because it's getting dark earlier? You know, and not be harshly critical of myself and try and not ruminate over it, which is so hard. And, you know, being able to understand that just because you have this insomnia, it doesn't mean it's going to be like the end of everything, you know, like, and I guess the other thing is being able to ask for help. You know, if you were studying and you were having a really bad insomnia episode, this is something that I didn't do. But when I was doing my first degree, I'll never forget, I was like really struggling, living on my own in halls. And I wish if I went back 10 years ago that I'd had the ability to say to my tutors, do you know what, like, my insomnia is so awful right now. Could I get an extension? Could I get some support? You know, don't be afraid to ask for help, which I think we're all really guilty of, genuinely. Like, none of us wants to ask for help because it's a vulnerable thing. Sleep for me has become much more safe because of having the ability to know how important it is. I never had safety before with sleep, but I also should be transparent to say I don't think I grew up in the most safe environment. And I think that was quite a hard thing to learn, not even really in therapy, just with my own personal work I do. You know, I'm doing the dishes and I have these weird moments where I go, oh gosh, that really was difficult to navigate as a child, a teenager, and I shouldn't have had to go through that. And that was one thing that, you know, when you grow up with parents who have their own flaws and their own troubles and they want to party every weekend because they think they're still 18, and then a child is listening to, you know, really loud music at like 1 a.m. and they can't sleep because of it, you know, like, that's heartbreaking. And that doesn't surprise me that there then felt like a lack of safety. You know, that's not the only reason. I think there's many reasons that contribute to this, but I think your surroundings can be really important. You know, I think for me, the safety really came from deciding to live on my own and getting comfortable with the uncomfortable silence. That was when safety actually came. You know, I used to be, and I'm probably still a little bit like this, but a small percent, I used to be the kind of person that if I was to sit in the house in silence for, let's just say, 20 minutes, I probably would have shit myself, because I'd be like, oh, what was that noise? And I guess in a way, like, having the cats maybe helped as well, because the moment you've got animals in your house, you're like, oh, well, it probably might be them. And it usually is, to be honest. You hear a noise, you think, what's that? And you think it's probably them. And it was. So I think the safety came from being able to be uncomfortable and be on my own. But that took a lot of work. And, that is something that I've got family and friends who are older who've not even managed that in their 40s and 50s and are envious of me. And it has been a helpful mirror to go, oh, wow, to move out and live on your own at 25 is quite a big deal. If I could get the healthcare that I wanted from a situation in a package that made me, feel comfortable and happy with life, I think it would be two things. The first would be I would just sleep and wouldn't have to take medication for it. I wouldn't have my brain buzzing with 100 thoughts and wouldn't have to overthink everything. I wouldn't be worried about what's going on in the world. If I was able to just get my brain to shut off naturally, that would be a gift. And maybe that'll come with age and time and healing, but it might not. And I'm actually trying and always in the process making peace with that taking a medication long term maybe is that thing for me that helps. But if it was my dream, I wouldn't need to take the medication and I would be able just to go to bed and completely sleep. I've got friends that can nap during the day and I rarely can nap. I've never been able to do that. And if I have, I usually don't want to get up. Don't want to get up after like a 2-hour nap. I just want to sleep all day. So the dream would be that. But I think in terms of a healthcare package right now, with how the world is and my whole life, I would just love it if you would get people that would listen. Listening is such a hard skill that not enough people have. And it's not just a medical profession thing. We're always jumping to give our opinion, our thoughts on the situation. We all can be guilty of that. But to have someone who just listens every single time, not just the occasional, like my GP, not an occasional doctor who's a specialist who suddenly comes along and I think, wow, you're actually listening to me. It would be so helpful if all doctors and medical professionals would actually just listen. That would be a dream. Whether or not that'll happen, I can't say.
The fundamental human need for sleep emerges as a powerful undercurrent in Jordan's story. What many take for granted, the simple act of closing one's eyes and drifting off, has been for Jordan a lifelong struggle, shaping not just their nights, but their entire experience of being in the world. There's a particular vulnerability in sharing how insomnia became intertwined with their sense of safety, from those early memories of restlessness as a child to the complex reality of managing it alongside cystic fibrosis and gender identity. The courage it took to reach out to their GP at their lowest point speaks to a universal truth about seeking help, how we often wait until we can no longer bear the weight alone. Jordan's initial shame around medication echoes what many feel, that somehow needing biochemical support represents a personal failure rather than simply another path toward well-being. Yet in that moment of surrender came a revelation. Wow, this is what it feels like to have a good night's sleep. The cascading effects of sleep deprivation ripple through Jordan's account. The irrational health anxieties, the memory gaps, the fear of losing control when simple problems suddenly appear insurmountable. These experiences highlight how our most basic physiological needs directly impact our psychological stability. For Jordan, creativity has served as both profession and therapy. We therefore have to note the irony of widespread arts funding cuts despite evidence of their therapeutic value. What stands out most powerfully for me is how addressing their sleep became a catalyst for broader transformation. The boundaries Jordan established, the toxic relationships they left behind, and the fuller expression of their gender identity all flowered from that first act of self-advocacy. Their journey toward being comfortable with the uncomfortable, learning to sit with the silence, to live independently, to face fears rather than avoid them, models a path that many might recognise. Jordan's frustration with being judged rather than heard by medical professionals touches on a systemic issue that affects countless others, particularly those with complex or marginalised identities. Their simple wish, "I would just love it if you would get people that would listen," cuts to the heart of what truly healing healthcare might look like. In sharing these experiences, from childhood television rituals to finding peace in nature's grounding presence, Jordan, you remind us that sleep isn't just about rest. It's about safety, identity, and the capacity to fully engage with life. Your story invites us to consider how our relationship with sleep might be shaping our mental landscapes in ways we've yet to fully acknowledge. Thank you, Jordan, for opening this window into your experience and for showing that even our most persistent struggles can become doorways to a deeper self-understanding and authentic living. If you have experienced or experiencing anything described in this episode, then you will find support information in the notes to accompany this podcast. A Sonic Hug is recorded, edited, and produced by me, Helena Rafai. Until next time, deep breaths.
From the Big Light Studio.